Good evening and welcome to COVID-19 Watch, Forward Stronger. I am your host, Stephen Duncan, and it excites me to be able to moderate these discussions and to have you tuned in. Tonight, we delve into perhaps the greatest topic of them all, the economy. For a moment, focus on our country's economic performance was no longer center stage, as our leaders had to prioritize the health and well-being of our population. We were able to successfully avoid a wild outbreak of COVID-19 in Belize, and so we are looking at ways to revamp our economy and business activity with the understanding that COVID-19 is here to stay. And we are also at the point where we should be aggressively pursuing sustainable development if we are to reconstruct a resilient economy. To do justice to tonight's topic, I am joined by three distinguished people. Firstly, Dr. Carla Barnett, who is the Minister of Labor and Local Government. Welcome, Dr. Barnett.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Steve.
Secondly, we have Mr. Giacomo Sanchez, who is a member of the Executive Council of the BCCI and a CPA in his own right in an accounting firm. Welcome, Kimo.
Hi, good night, everybody.
And of course, Ms. Kay Menzies, who needs no introduction, past president of the BCCI, hosts herself on another program. Welcome, Ms. Kay.
Steve, thank you. Thanks for the invite.
So I want to welcome everyone and thank you for joining us. And I want to remind the viewers to please be sure to jump into the conversation. You may post your questions in the comments section on Colorbline's Facebook page. We have all seen the effects of COVID on the economy, while thousands of Belizeans and business owners have suffered serious consequences. We know that the tourism industry and its supply chain that services that industry have been hardest hit. We are now faced with an unprecedented level of unemployment, and the return to business as usual is nowhere in sight. So my first question then is, what are your thoughts, panelists, on how we address the high level of unemployment? We're going straight into the deep end here, you know? So, so maybe I could, I'm going to leave Dr. Barnett as Minister of Labor for last, because she might be able to use some of what you guys have in mind to be able to pull it together for us, and she'll have to execute it, no? So maybe I can start with, Kimo, do you have any thoughts on how do we address the high level of unemployment? And then I'll ask Kay the same question.
Yeah, well, from where we sit, we're looking at trying to fill a void of approximately 45% of our GDP, and that's a monumental task. That will be extremely difficult. I think the partnership between government and private sector has to come into play, whereby there has to be quite a bit more support for a longer period of time, at least through to February of next year, March, I would estimate that that kind of linkage or partnership has to continue, because the private sector alone won't be able to handle it, because the easiest and most low-hanging fruit generally is that of employment, and that generally goes first. And I think that is what I think government focus should be in terms of aiding the private sector one way or the other. I don't know if Aki would like to add in there.
Well, no, I think, we're, first of all, looking for answers to what would be labor-intensive projects. in the private sector, for example, and I've mentioned this previously, that one of the industries that kind of ticks all the boxes, it creates foreign exchange and creates fairly large numbers of employment, is the BPO sector. To encourage sectors that are labor intensive like that, where call centers can come in and we can ramp up from call centers in terms of the business process outsourcing opportunities. When we say that, we have to look at our neighbors around us. For example, in North America, the Americans are suffering as well, and that means also trying to cut their costs. This creates, believe it or not, an opportunity for us where we're cheaper labor than the US market and so on.
Correct.
It's those kinds of activities that we ought to be looking at as priority and saying, look, you want to do nearshoring? Here we are. We speak English, just to remind you, and we have quite a lot of people who are able to handle what you need us to handle. Looking at other opportunities. In the past, we've been quite comfortable with tourism. It's now gone, but the people who are present within tourism have other skills. And well, when I say that, they have skills that can be used in other ways. Begin to think about the innovation opportunities that exist with those skills that are now unfortunately idle, and where we can begin to export those skills. There's a lot of industry in terms of digital marketing. Digital is a very favorite space of mine to discuss, but these are possibilities where we can get young people trained up relatively quickly and start to export services. And then agriculture is having to ramp up as it is, and agro-processors need a fair amount of help, but they also need a fair amount of labor if we can get things going. The idea being that perhaps if we can invest in those industries, the return will be relatively quick, again, both in foreign exchange and in employment. So it's those kinds of government working together, creating these projects, assisting private sector with relatively small amounts of money, all things considered, to help things get going a little more quickly, low interest loans and so on, to allow the jobs to sink back in, but not, I mean, as you say, Steve, not the new normal or the return to normal, but to find new ways of operating.
Correct, correct. Dr. Barnett,
And maybe before Dr. Barnett jumps in, I'd just like to add, we're crossing into another school year, and what that implies is that we have about 2,000 to 3,000 people who are leaving school either at the associate's level or combined with the bachelor's level that are looking for employment. So that is adding on to the employment burden that we currently that is upon us in other sectors. So that is something I think I'd like Dr. Barnett to also consider in her response.
Yeah, well, actually, I was going to put it back at you, but all right, let's see what Dr. Barnett says. I wanted to see what answers you in the private sector might have to assist Dr. Barnett. But all right, Dr. Barnett, this is not new totally, the concept of going to the labor-intensive areas and industries. A few years ago, we did it with the infrastructure works, where we made sure we employed people to do a lot of the cementing of the streets, etc., partly in an effort to utilize people, human labor, and create employment. So what is being suggested is not a new concept, but how easy do you think it is to get it off the ground now, given our circumstances where we are kind of ring-fence and lock off, etc.?
It's a very difficult situation for everybody, and I always remind whenever we start talking about this situation, what makes it doubly difficult, it is not only us. When it's a normal type of disaster, you know, you can reach out to your friends and people are willing to help, but this is global. This is affecting everyone, and therefore the economic shocks that we are experiencing are being experienced across the world. And the health situation is difficult across the world, in some places more than others, depending on how successful they've been or unsuccessful in treating with the coronavirus. Here in Belize, our own fallout has been particularly difficult because tourism in particular is such a large part of the economy. We like to boast about the large percentage of persons who are employed in tourism, and that's the truth. We are now faced with all of those people virtually who have lost their jobs. We're beginning to see some of it come back with the local tourism. I don't know how hopeful we can be that it's going to rebound in any meaningful way before the end of the year. We're opening the airport on the 15th of August is the scheduled date. Nobody is really expecting tourists to flood into Belize and these jobs miraculously reappear. It's not going to happen. So therefore, what do? Some of the suggestions that have been made, Kay talked about the option of BPOs. That's going really very well already, because the BPO sector does provide a service that we are in a close position to the US, which is the largest market, and we have the language capabilities that allow us to respond there. The issue of retooling, all of that is very important. But a colleague of mine from Jamaica reminded me the other day that really the largest challenge in a situation like this is really for us to be able to feed ourselves. And therefore, we have to put the greatest priority on agriculture. And we're not talking only large agriculture, we're talking about agriculture at the livelihood level as well. We're talking about small scale agriculture, where small scale producers have been in the past able to bring their products to market, develop niche markets. A lot of the small scale producers, for example, that were producing fruits and vegetables for the tourism sector now have lost their markets, and they're having difficulty feeding their families. And therefore, we have to see the importance of that small scale agriculture. We also cannot forget our MSMEs. You know, we've been working on an MSME policy. It's been launched. We're expecting it to roll out. And the reason why that is so important is because upwards of 60-70% of jobs are created in the MSME sector. And we're talking about people who are small scale producers of a variety of goods and services. That's where the employment is. That's a sector that needs to see reasonable support from government, support that will allow them to do two things. One is, yes, earn foreign exchange for the country, but two, produce goods and services for us to consume locally so that we do not have to spend scarce foreign exchange. So there are a lot of things that we can do, but the resource constraint, the financial constraint is real. We look to government. Government has also lost a significant portion of its revenue. The last number the number that I keep hearing is $400 million. That's a large percentage of government's recurrent revenue that's been lost. And there's no making it back up. We have to do things differently, and it's been lost at precisely the time that government has to be spending additional money on the health response as well. So it's both an economic response and a health response. Yes. So both government and the private sector, it's all sectors of our country, all sectors of the world economy that's been affected by this in a way that we've never seen before. So new. And we talk about the new normal. I don't know if there's a new normal. I don't know what the new ways of doing things will be, because we're still experiencing the rollout of this impact. Innovation, absolutely. Using ICTs to produce, to sell, to receive payments, all of those are really very important. But at the end of the day, what we do and how we respond is something that we have to agree with together. It's not something that government alone can do, and it's not something that the private sector alone can do. It's something that we really have to be working at together. And a lot of that working together is taking place.
So if
maybe not enough.
Yeah.
But there is a fair amount of that's happening.
So if I am to understand you correctly, Doctor, effectively it sounds to me that, in fact, we are still rolling, as you said, it's still rolling out. Effectively, what it means is that
Yes.
we are not going to get back to any semblance of normalcy in the short term. And so, in that context, maybe I could ask Kimo, in light of such a situation, I don't know at the level of the private sector, the chamber, and maybe affiliate associations or so. Kimo, are you guys hearing of anything out there, any creative ideas, any novel ideas, anything that can help in this process? Because in fact, we're talking about going deeper into some sort of recovery package. That seems to be what we've started this conversation with. So I sense that we are thinking that the recovery is not necessarily short term. I don't know what kind of time frame we're putting on it, but it might not be short term. So other than the government digging deeper to try to give more people aid or continue the aid longer, I think Dr. Barnett is saying that it will take government and the private sector. But in a case like this, what is the private sector thinking? Is there anything creative or novel we're thinking about?
I'm not sure that we've crossed that bridge as yet, because as we speak, most businesses and entities that I've engaged with, they're at the point where we're just trying to weather the storm, and there's not much in terms of this creativity or ingenuity. It can't just be a sole effort of just your private and local investors. It has to be a marriage between international interests that we can't at this point come to the table because of travel restrictions and all of that. So I think people are just hunkering down and trying to see how the next few months plays out.
All right. Kay, we noticed that let's, in the context of the marriage between the international and the local, to a large extent, we're talking debt. I mean, you're talking IFIs. They might be the only ones who have money to be helping you right now. And as we all know, even the IFIs, the demand is actually great on them because it's just like about every country in the world trying to get some money from the IFIs right now. So in that context, what does that mean for us? Because it's more debt, and I'm not sure that we are excited about taking on more debt as a country. What is likely to be the effect of Belize's debt position by the time we get through this?
Well, that's. I think Dr. Barnett has the PhD that explains that a lot better. But no, I mean, when it comes to, you mentioned we have something like 200 countries out there competing for dollars one way or another. Even the rich ones. When you hear Saudi Arabia complaining that they're having fiscal issues that they have to focus on, I mean, here, put that in context.
Absolutely.
So I picture it's almost like a New York marathon scene where you see all these bunch of runners heading in one direction, in this case towards the IFIs. And yes, we need to, the problem is that we don't have resources of our own when it comes to cash. We don't have much space. So it's difficult to tell anybody that we're not borrowing. It's difficult to avoid borrowing.
Correct.
The thing about it is, and this is coming from my layperson's private sector perspective, is to try to make sure that what we borrow is for a purpose. I mean, yes, we have had to borrow for health. We continue to have to borrow for health. There's no such thing as being over-prepared for COVID-19. But in terms of the economic side, if we're borrowing, let's try to make sure that we're borrowing for projects that give us a relatively quick return. When I say that, looking at how we can bring that money in and put it to work quickly. We're going to end up in much more debt after this. There's no way around that. But it's to try to make sure that that debt is somehow working for us. If we bring in the money just to give away, we'll end up with debt, and we will have bridged some of the immediate difficulties, but not with a long-term solution in mind. In all of this, I think we're viewing this as 3 stages. We're viewing this as survival, recovery, and then resilience.
Gotcha.
And it's easy to compromise resilience and recovery by what you do in the survival phase. So we have to be very, very careful as we're making decisions now that we don't endanger the recovery and the resilience because of what we did during survival.
Yes. Dr. Barnett, as you spoke earlier, I get the impression that we might still be at survival, that things are still happening. And in fact, I'm aware from other information that was available in the public domain that there are still some people who might not have received their financial aid and assistance. That's still being dealt with and addressed.
Yes.
So effectively, survival is still very much before us, even now.
It is.
Sorry.
It is, and go ahead, Steve.
No, so I was going to ask you, how do you balance this to Kay's point that she was making earlier? You don't want to sacrifice resilience and recovery but clearly we need the survival.
No, you don't. No, you don't. But you have to be aware that this is an emergency situation. This is an emergency disaster, actually. I was involved in a conversation late last week with some UN agencies and some of the international financial institutions, because they're trying to come to terms with a situation in which governments across the world have seen their revenues drop. Economies have come to a standstill as most countries have had to get into lockdowns. And so we're seeing a situation in which the ability of persons who would normally be working has just been undermined. They can't literally physically get out and go to work. So they can't produce, they can't earn. The business owners can't turn over their production equipment. And it's a situation in which the UN in particular is focusing and trying to get the international financial institutions to focus on the fact that first, we have to deal with survival. We have to ensure that people eat. We have to ensure that people's shelters remain whole. Because the last thing the international community wants is for there to be such a rapid increase in poverty and inability to eat. Starvation is facing some countries. Many countries, the access to food has declined. And so it's becoming a situation in which the international financial institutions in particular are having a conversation of how do we ensure that countries get through this crisis so that at the end of the day, the impact on the international financial system is not such that it doesn't work anymore. It is in danger of not working anymore because it cannot yield up the level of liquidity that countries need at the rate that countries can afford to pay, whether pre-COVID or post-COVID rates, it really doesn't matter. Because the debt that most of us owe is really quite large. And therefore, the focus has to be first on survival. And then they're pushing, the discussion is about building back better. Building back better is the resilient conversation. But remember, building back better is something that came out of the hurricane response discussion of a few years ago. That's where the building back better comes from, because people are recognizing that where we are right now, it is like building back after a hurricane. We're building back economies. And it's different in the sense that a hurricane passes and within a month the cleanup is passed. Then within 2 months we see buildings start to. We're 4 months into this. We are 4 months into this, and we're not seeing the level of activity that would allow us to be comfortable that by the end of this year we're going to be seeing economies return to any level of normalcy. We're now talking about mid 2021. The thing that I always say is at the end of the day, we will learn how to deal with COVID. If we find a vaccine, that will be the way. If we don't, we will have to integrate all of this new sanitization and social distancing and different ways of relating into the so-called new norm. But until we get to that, we continue to be in a transition phase. And in tourism, for example, there's a big discussion about when and if and when we're going to see cruise tourism globally. Because it's not only you open your port, it's whether people want to get on cruise ships. Yeah. This thing is in relation with airplanes. You open the airport, you don't know how many people will want to get on a plane.
Correct.
It's a new kind of thinking that we have to recognize that we, first of all, will have to be much more self-reliant.
Yeah.
And second of all, the things that we used to depend on as our sources of income are not necessarily the things we're going to be able to depend on in the future. Okay. So we thinking differently. Yes. We have to be preparing ourselves to do things differently. People have to be prepared to do different things that's in the private sector and in the public sector, and to do the same things in different kinds of ways.
All right. No, effectively...
Try to do it the same way, we're not going to be able to.
Correct. Miss K, when you look at
Steve,
oh, hi. Yes, Kimo?
Yeah. I didn't want to lose this thought, and it tails right off of what the doctor was mentioning earlier.
Yeah.
I think we need to be cognizant of the relationship between countries and the IFIs. And what I do know is that the IFIs, they do have an appetite, particularly since they are aware of how countries currently are struggling. And what I do know is that they have an appetite to ensure that, some things, so long as countries during this period of recovery and as we transition to some type of reliance down the road, as part of our response as a country, we should be judicious in how we dispose of those loans and funding that we're getting. And if there's transparency and proper accountability for it, I think we're in a good place a year from now, because it will be the easiest thing for us to then approach these institutions and get kind of haircut that I believe that is part of their response. But I don't think they'll come out immediately and say that to you. But as a responsible government, I think that is where these needs to be kind of shore itself up to ensure that the funding that, if I should put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of, you're talking, Kimo, in terms of accountability of how we utilize the funding, that's what you're talking about?
How those loan proceeds are disposed of.
Oh, I see. All right, okay. Good point. That has to do more, though, with accountability to the IFIs, but in terms of how we use it and what we do with it. I think what we were discussing was in terms of survival, activities surrounding survival versus activities in terms of building resiliency and the recovery aspect. So from that context, though, let's bring it down to the micro level. The very thing that is happening with the IFIs and the international market and the concerns about probably liquidity and the ability for the IFIs to be able to service everybody and keep the whole global economy going within our own economy, as the impact hits, though, how does it affect, say, the commercial banks and the ability of the commercial banks to keep businesses going? Because in as much as businesses are not able to pay their debts and service their debts now, and we don't know when they will be able to start to do that, how do we as a country keep moving forward? Because it's not just the IFIs. and the funds they send in to help us. But how do we as a country keep moving without and make sure that we don't impact the banking sector to the extent that it doesn't work for us going forward? It puts us on a serious strain then, let me put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds maybe a bit...
Part of the response has to be...
Sorry, go ahead, Kimo.
No, I say part of that response has to do with locally how our regulators measure the type of instructions that will be given within the banking system, because a great deal of how they package and also message to the local system, that's the kind of response that then has then trickled to individual parties who are borrowing and people who are currently have facilities with their institutions. At the end of the day, the measures has to be relaxed for a longer period of time, and therefore, once the banks aren't penalized, then I'm sure that they will be able to continue working with their customers, and that will give everybody some breathing room to continue doing business.
I got you. All right. Well, I want to I want us to be a little more specific in that area, but let me take just a quick commercial break now. And when we come back, we'll deal with this same question, but I want it to be a little more specific. So I'm going to ask our viewers to just stay with us. When we return, we will continue our conversation, and we also will be fielding questions from the general public. So please stay tuned. Welcome back to COVID-19 Watch, Forward Stronger. I am your host, Stephen Duncan, and I have been joined by video call by Dr. Carla Barnett, Minister of Labor and Local Government, Mr. Giacomo Sanchez, Executive Council of the BCC, Belize Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and Ms. Kay Menzies, who is the past president of the Belize Chamber of Commerce and Industry. So, when we left, we were I'm thinking that we could get some specifics in terms of the impact in our local banking sector, which is required right now to try to sustain us. In the same way as a country that we look to the international financial institutions to try to help us through, similarly business persons out there are looking to the local financial institutions to try to help them through. But there is a very interesting dichotomy. The longer it takes, the help that is being given to that business person is actually creating and resulting in a much higher debt to that business person because interest continues to run and they have no income. At what point does it become catastrophic? Maybe I ought not to use that word. But at what point, where do we get to the point where that business person might not be able to get back off the ground? And this is what we need to be very conscious of. Not all businesses might not be able to recover and get back off the ground, because the longer COVID takes, the debt will become, for some of them, insurmountable as interest continues to accrue and add on. And so I come back again, I'm trying to get specifics. What can be done? Are there, for instance, policies that we ought to change? Are you calling on the banking sector to do something differently? Are we calling on businesses to do something differently? Might it be better for us to begin to look at doing some form of analysis as CPAs and accountants and auditors who can survive, who probably ought not to get out the game now while they're ahead, that type of thing? What can we do?
Yeah, just simply terminating business would not be an easy option. So the response has to be, part of the response has to be that the banking sector needs to appreciate the fact that, well, if there's no
I think I lost you,
income coming in within the system at the moment, and so interest and printing penalized for carrying out such a measure. To me, that is only the most practical expedient at this time that should be considered, because if the banking system continue thinking that we're doing business as usual as if there was no pandemic, then I think they're into closing off quite a bit of the economy, because our economy just cannot sustain that fixture within your financial burdens. That burden, people simply will not be able to carry that for a very short period of time. It has to be lengthened. So that, I think that's part of the response there.
I'm afraid, Kimo, I missed you for a bit of it, and I didn't get what you said was the only real practical thing for us to be able to do going forward. I missed that. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just suggesting that as a specific, that within the banking system there should be some deferral of both principal and interest for an extended period, rather than just a 3-month period. It has to be a 6 to 8 months, depending on how long we have to endure the pandemic. Because for a large portion of the economy, people, as you indicated, people aren't collecting any money. There's no revenue coming into business, therefore they can't sustain and literally have to close the doors.
All right. Okay. Got you. Miss Menzies, anything to add to that?
No, I was just thinking how COVID really highlights the interconnectedness of the economy as we go along, and you know, listening to Kimo and the rest of the conversation, it really strikes me. First of all, central bank made some fairly quick moves to encourage the banks to be able to give those grace period of 3 to 6 months in the early stages. And I think I saw a memo earlier today suggesting an extension of grace period and a little further relaxing of NPLs, so that NPL requirements, so that banks could be able to do that. But as you say, Steve, that can only go on for so long.
Exactly.
And one of the conversations that we have to have is what happens when an open economy becomes closed. And I say that because, interestingly enough, local tourism has picked up. We're seeing various hotels reporting very heavy traffic on the weekends, of course, because we're all working during the week. But you're seeing a lot of local expenditure that normally probably would have gone north. And you're seeing Chetumal complaining because some of that expenditure that went north is no longer going, and they are losing businesses because we're not there. This is a little bit of a pressure relief on the economy at the moment, that money is actually staying home and not going across.
Totally
and
agree.
that's why so far it hasn't been worse than it is. And I think it's important to make that point, because we've often had the conversation about what we're sending over across the border, Chetumal, Melchor, wherever. And now here's the proof of it. Here's what's happening, how dollars are staying to some extent at home.
But
It's enabling a little bit lengthening of the disaster. To me, as far as I'm concerned, we're just walking into the crisis now on the economic side.
Okay, got
It's
you.
just really kicking off and getting deeper. But what has kept it going so long is that ability to keep dollars at home that wasn't happening before.
And I totally agree. And we see the difference because of it in terms of how the business sector has been operating. But by and large, people have been calling for changes to things like monetary policy, fiscal policy. But something like that, should we not be putting on the table that we look at it? What can we do about it? Because let's be honest, as soon as those borders reopen, the buses will start to line up at the border again to go across. What can be done? I mean, I don't know if anything can be done, but I'm saying we have seen the benefit of it because of COVID, the benefit of people spending their dollars at home. We've seen the benefit of it. How can we encourage them more to do it? And on that note, the question then becomes, what industries do we think will be able to recover? Which ones will be able to recover more quickly than the other? Where should we be focusing in terms of recovery? How do we do that? Dr. Barnett, any thoughts on that? Uh-oh, you're mute, Doc.
Let me on mute.
Yeah,
Yes.
you got it.
Yeah, there's been a lot of discussion about things that we can do differently, as new things that we can do. Tourism will come back, but tourism will come back in its own time when we have sorted out how comfortable people will be in terms of traveling, in terms of doing the kinds of things that tourists do on vacation.
Yes.
And many people believe that the kind of tourism that we normally do, not the cruise tourism, the stayover tourism, the market that we appeal to is the market that will return, because we're not a mass tourism market. We're a very, I suppose, the kind of ecotourism that we do is playing into a market from people who will want to be able to travel. And so that is something that we need to focus on. We need to determine if we're going to vary our main source from the US and market more to Europe. We're going to have to sort out other things from that. But there are ancillary things to tourism that we can talk about. And I know that there's a group that's been discussing things like ramping up our second home market, allowing people to work from here, using the technology and working abroad. That sort of market, which is being sought after by other countries already. And if we're going to do it, we need to be on our bicycles and getting after it already. In terms of the agriculture, I keep emphasizing how important agriculture is because of our ability to produce, and the fact that other countries are going to be needing food, and we ought to be in a position to supply.
Correct.
And therefore, we cannot forget how important that that sector will be. But you were discussing earlier, Steve, the issue with the domestic banking system, and one of the things that we need to bear in mind, in as much as the international financial system is having to reconsider working differently, maybe our domestic financial system will also need to work differently.
Totally agree.
The way we respond, how we treat with customers, the way we program our credit facilities. We may have to start thinking about working differently as well.
Absolutely.
Our local banking system, because the old ways of managing across the economy will have to change. It will have to change. One of the comments that I've had to remind some people of is, in the old days, or in the pre-COVID days, when countries' fiscal affairs got out of hand, you put in a structural adjustment program, and you dampen demand, and you cut back. But we've already done that. This has been done for us. You understand? And so the old ways of fixing just will not work. We have to find a different way of adjusting.
And also
that different way is not only for government, it's for the private sector, it's for the banking system. We all have to find a different way of doing what we do.
Also, Doc, when that type of measure was used when you had an economy as a going concern. This is the first time you have an economy that has come to a halt. And so when it comes to a halt, you have to pump more money in to get it off the ground, to start that inertia. You have to develop that inertia again.
And so one of the things, I don't know if any of you heard the UN Secretary General in his speech a day or two ago, I think on Saturday. He was talking about how COVID has put inequality under the magnifying glass. One of the things we're seeing is that wealthy countries are able to do the kind of stimulus that you need to do so that businesses can sell to consumers and consumers can eat, and so the economy turns around. So the larger countries are able to do that because they have the resources. Smaller countries are not able to do that, but we still have the same need. We still have the same need to ensure that money turns around. We don't have a lot of money flowing through the banking system, so there are limits there. Government doesn't have the resources to do significant stimulus, so there are constraints there as well. And the inequality in treatment within and across countries is being magnified by this.
One of the questions from social media.
And how do we deal with it? If we don't deal with it, people die. And we have places where people are not able to eat right now. That's the reality.
Yeah. One of the questions from social media is tourism may not really resume until 2021. Will the unemployment relief program continue? I get people are wondering if it will continue to 2021. And I think this speaks to what Kima had mentioned earlier when we started, that in fact, there needs to be some continuation of the program to be able to get people through this period. Has any thought been given to this, Doc? Will government be able to go beyond, say, the last quarter of this year?
At this stage, I can't give any commitment. It really depends on the resources that are available. It really depends on the state of the economy at that time.
Yes.
And so it's not something that we can say it's going to be extended. What I will say is that if it is the case that the level of business activities is so low, the levels of unemployment are still high, there has to be a solution. And we will have to find that solution, because at the end of the day, people have children to feed and go to school, and businesses have people to hire and things to produce. And so we'll have to figure out how that takes place. All right. The economy cannot be allowed to die, because that's really the country. Not being able to keep its business activity, its social organization going. It just that just is not acceptable.
Good.
How we do it is something that we will have to sort out as we get along there.
Yeah, there's also a question for the chamber reps. It says the BCCI has economic gurus and a membership of extremely successful business persons. What is stopping them from collectively and aggressively pursuing new business opportunities to lead a private sector charge of job creation and new economic activity? Has any thought been given to this, Kay and Kimo? Has any gathering been held of the business sector, the private sector, so to speak, to see what could be done?
Kimo, I'll let you lead off. Since you sit on that committee.
What I'm aware of is that you will find that it is not a black and white issue, because most businesses, as you know, are operating from within their own little niche, and just trying to explode businesses in the normal course of doing business. It's difficult for you to bring parties together and get things off the ground. Can you imagine now, during an ensuing pandemic that we're trying to reach that level? I think it's much more difficult than, to me, that's more of an academic exercise than the reality on the ground. You ask any business person out there, the difficulty in trying to maintain their existence at this time, and of course trying to take those already thin dollars and trying to coming up with new businesses. It's a bit of a stretch. Okay.
Well, I would jump in and say that what it is we're seeing mixed results as the whole process goes along. You first of all, it's a little bit assessing the issue. This is unprecedented. The last major pandemic was over 100 years ago. None of us were around for it. And so we're all trying to figure our way through this. And this means that you're looking, you're reading, you're trying to keep as informed as possible. You're trying to see what might answer. And this week you try something, next week you might try something else. Those who have the resources to try those things.
Yes.
And sadly, I mean, some businesses won't quite work out, but some will see some success because they latched on to something that is at a success point. Because pandemics have also, as much as they've destroyed, they've also created. For example, businesses such as Alibaba came out of the SARS epidemic extremely successful. And we're seeing Amazon in the US right now coming out mega successful and beyond crazy numbers. So, and in its time, the Spanish influenza had that kind of effect. So we're going to see development come out of this, and we're going to see losses come out of this. But going back to what Dr. Barnett said earlier, 70% of our jobs come from MSME sector. Whatever portion of the economy they occupy, MSMEs create 70% of our private sector jobs. What I was thinking in terms of, as we were talking just now, Steve, is there is a form of stimulus that we haven't discussed yet. We keep talking about stimulus from a cash infusion point of view, but we can stimulate an economy through processes. And this is a conversation that's been happening for a long time, and it needs to happen again now. For example, the public service has a role to play, and the public service has to recognize its role along with the private sector. The private sector, just to go back to what Dr. Barnett said for a second about the banks have to do things a lot differently. We just went through an epidemic where nobody wanted to touch cash, nobody wanted to accept checks because they might be contaminated, but your electronic options were minimal at best and really not, let me be polite to the banker in the room, not state of the art to the point of the best available today. And so we need to beef up there. But then going back to the public sector as well, if there are businesses looking to open, enable them to open quickly. If there are businesses looking to invest in land and a land transaction occurring, let that happen quickly. If we are talking incentives, incentivize an entire sector instead of me having to spend time filling out forms and finding money to invest in order to get a DPA. Let's look at in sector-wide. And Dr. Barnett is smiling because she's heard me say this for a very long time now. But we're getting to the point now, we're at the point now where these decisions and these activities have to happen quickly. And so if you in the public sector are somebody who has the power to make things happen quickly, to process a transaction or to make sure that an application goes through, you have a role in making sure that success occurs, because the longer a business takes to get on its feet, the less likely it will succeed. So, I'm saying this because when we talk stimulus, we have got to focus on the processes as much as we do the cash.
Correct. It's not just about putting money in. I understand fully. And the efficiency, the efficacy, etc., has to be taken into consideration. It's a pity we have to end on this note, but unfortunately, that is it for question and answer time for today. And as usual, our time has come and gone very quickly. I really wanted us to continue. But anyhow, before I wrap up, in as much as all that has happened just now has taken place. Maybe I could give just 10 seconds if everybody can take 10 seconds quickly, and we'll be able to get through this without my producer screaming at me. 10 seconds. Dr. Barnett, would you like to go? I think Kay had quite a bit there just now. Yes.
Absolutely. I want to agree with Kay that we need to be much more efficient. That means incorporating the IT as much as we can, delivering the best quality service wherever it is to be delivered, whether it's in the public or the private sector, and being able to adapt our business processes to the new reality. And I go right back. That includes the banking system.
Yes.
That efficiency improvement has to include the banking system, but it covers the public sector and the private sector in terms of adapting to the new reality.
I'm so glad that tonight I'm a talk show host and not a banker. Kimo?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what Kay started off in terms of the processes. I think it has to be just beyond efficiency. I think how we get that implemented is the important thing. And I think the instruction has to come from the policymakers, and that has to be driven down overnight. It can't be investors waiting in line for months at a time. I think we need to shrink that time, compress time as much as possible. And I think we'll be in a much better place in terms of getting much more stimulus out of coming out of this pandemic.
Excellent. Okay, Kay, 5 seconds.
Last word for me. No, I just wanted to say we always talk about the new normal, but basically what we need is new ways of looking at things. Because what's happening now, being unprecedented, requires a response of a different kind. So we can't sit there and say, we'll do the same old things and it'll get better. We can't say, boy, I'll just sit here and wait for tourism to come back. We can't say, gosh, I'll knock down my prices 10% and then I'll do all my sales. It has to be a different way of thinking. And part of that is that we have to start to figure out the ways of working together. We've not been very good at that in our economy, and it's time we started.
All right, good. Thank you very much. I want to thank the viewers for joining me tonight. And clearly you're encouraged to return for more COVID-19 Watch right here on Channel 7 or on Facebook. Kay, Doc, Kimo, thank you all very much. I don't know, it's sounding as though I'm going to have you guys back to have another, to tie this up. I don't think we tied it up as nicely as I would have liked. Thank you very much, and we'll go to
the hour passed too quickly.
We'll go to a quick commercial break. Thank you very much. Viewers, today we delve into a most urgent and important topic, our economy. Ms. Menzies summed it up very well by articulating our path as being survival, recovery, then resilience. Naturally, we all desire to reach that point of having a resilient economy that may be able to withstand future shocks like what we are experiencing right now. But for now, the survival phase remains paramount. We know that as soon as the pandemic was declared and the impacts began materializing, public and the private sector and even individuals have had to find ways to cut back on spending as income streams dwindled. Government has had to deliver food and funds to persons to ensure their survival. And overall, we've had no choice but to look inward and find creative ways to meet our own needs, to keep our dollars at home, and to be our brothers' keepers. We also discussed the transparent and responsible application of loan proceeds from IFIs that can possibly even usher in recovery on the path to resilience. We discussed the issue of high unemployment because of the pandemic. We know already that high unemployment is not only an economic issue, but also one that can spill into social issues in areas of crime, malnutrition, and even mental health challenges for persons. Labor-intensive industries such as call centers and small-scale agriculture were identified as prime candidates to bolster if we wish to inject stimulus into the economy that can have immediate effect. In terms of incubating a resilient economy, Dr. Barnett mentioned a culprit that has been brought under the microscope: wealth inequality. While wealthy countries have been able to afford multi-billion-dollar stimulus programs to citizens and bailout for industries, developed countries are not in the same position. So then, how do we pull off this feat? How do we work on a resilient economy while focus is still required on survival and recovery? The answer to that is beyond any one person, beyond any one industry, and beyond any one government. In fact, it's beyond any one episode of COVID-19 Watch. So we will continue to explore this topic and to pick the brains of professionals and experts across our country. We will continue to scout and articulate a Belize-appropriate prescription for our troubles that no one else will solve on our behalf. Sorry for the cliffhanger tonight, but viewers, thanks for joining me tonight. You're encouraged to return for more COVID-19 Watch right here on Channel 7 or on Facebook so we can continue to dig even deeper in order to find more answers. Join us Thursday at 8 p.m. when we look at the future of the economy in Belize. Do enjoy the rest of your night and the remainder of your week. Take care.